Welcome to Uncurated Conversations with me, Mlamli Mayosi. Yeah, this song it's a very poignant song, irrespective of uh, what you follow. It's just an uplifting song. Yeah, Friday the 1st of August. Friday the 1st of August. Lovely day. Yeah, yesterday I was watching Pen the Black Pen, or Konvo, I think his name of the podcast is. He was interviewing Jan. And interesting conversation. I would recommend you go and listen to that entire podcast, Konvo. One of the conversations they were having, they were talking about the phases that we go through in life. So you get the child phase, and then you've got the teenage phase, and then you have your adult phase. After 21, you're supposed to be an adult in some cultures. In some, it's 18. And so these different stages that we go through. And what they were saying is that, and which I agree, is that when you go from the child to the teenager, you don't just leave the child behind in terms of the child phase behind, and then you become now this teenager who's independent from the child. You carry that child into your teenager, and then your teenage phase just layers on top of the child phase, and so does the adult phase, which layers on top of the child teenage phase. And so when you have this adult who behaves or has behaviors, and we say you're behaving like a child, it's because that child in that child phase is coming out. So you sulk, as an example. Sulking is a child. When you don't get something that you want, a child will go to the corner and they will sulk. And adults sulk. Adults throw tantrums. Those are childish behaviors. Because you go into that child mode when either you're stressed or whatever it is, whatever triggers, but we go back into these little phases. So if there's issues that haven't been resolved in any of these phases, they then appear in the adult phase, as an example, where you get adults that just behave like children, and we all know them. And that got me thinking, in our context in South Africa, where for decades that child was neglected. And so some of the critical things critical milestones that child should have received when they were a child, they don't receive those milestones, or they don't hit those milestones. And so they get into teenage years, carrying that deficit into the teenage years, and then they get within the teenage years, there's also deficits in there. And that is a myriad of things. In our case in South Africa, we come from a past where laws that were created to separate the family structure. So you had the homelands, which were reserves for labor. And so the males would go to Johannesburg and go work in the mines, or to go to Cape Town to go work on the farms. And so the whole family structure was broken apart. You had the mother, who probably had to go work as a domestic worker, in some cases, or in some cases they stay at home and they get remittance from the father. So you had that fracture of the family. Now this has been happening for decades. And so things that a father, as an example, would have instilled in that child, there's that deficit, whether it's discipline, whatever it is. And so that child gets into the teenagers with that deficit. Teenagers, the child does stuff, no one is there, there's no father figure to address. It could be anger issues, it could be anything. And so you get into then your adult years. And so when you see in our society where there is this high prevalence of gender-based violence, a high prevalence of alcohol abuse, a high prevalence of road rage, in my opinion, it's because some of those issues were never addressed at those critical phases. And so then you have adults who behave like children. And when you sit back and you look at the behavior and you say, but no, man, that doesn't make sense. It's because that event just triggers that child. And so to soothe that child, we then go and drink. And so looking at it from that perspective, you then look at us as a country, where the two dominant groups that are fighting against each other are the blacks and the Afrikaners. Because you must also be nuanced when you look at, in South Africa, the racial groups. Because within those racial groups, there's a lot of divisions. Within the white racial group, you've got Afrikaners, and then you've got British, or the English. Those are two distinct white nationalities, for lack of, no, not nationalities, but two distinct white groups within that homogeneous white racial group. Within the black group groupings, you've got Xhosas, you've got Zulus, you've got Tswanas, you've got Sesothos. And these people behave and do different things. Not necessarily they're bad, but they're not, so you can't just say all whites, all blacks. Unless you're playing rugby, that is. And so within this white group, the Afrikaner, right, is the one on the front line, who has been on the front line of the war between the blacks or the natives. Okay, 1912, 1910 happened. The British were there. Yes, there were wars between the British and the Dutch and the Boers. And then there were also and then there were also wars up in the Eastern Cape and further up north of the Western Cape between the British and the local indigenous peoples of that location. So it's not to say that the British did not go to war and did not fight. No, I mean, up in KZN, the British fought with the Zulus. So yes, But in our recent history, the fight has been between, since apartheid, has been between the Afrikaners and the majority. In the army, who was in the army? The army is Africa. The majority of the South African Defence Force is Afrikaans. The Navy is English. The police are Afrikaans, or were Afrikaans. Majority of the police were Afrikaans. The Navy was the only institution within the Defence Force that was, or within the security cluster, for lack of a better word, that was English or British. But the rest, all Afrikaans. And these were the guys. The army and the police were in the forefront, in the townships, in locking up people, jailing people, hit squads, all this stuff. It was the army and the police. And these were the guys who were being conscripted. Young Afrikaans boys. And women also. Some women, not all women. And so these guys come back home after going to fight in the borders, Mozambique, they were fighting Angola, they're fighting in townships, they have to kill people. A young 21, 22-year-old has to go to Angola, to the border, and kill people. I mean, go read up what Kufut did up in Angola. A lot of those guys came back with PTSD and they had families. You know, that young kids. Go see what the Rekis do. You know, go see what the Rekis do. Go and see how those guys turned out. So, the Afrikaners and the blacks in South Africa, from just a psychological perspective, we are in trouble. Look at the alcohol abuse amongst those two groupings. Townships. You know how, I mean, you don't even have to, it's not rocket science in the townships. Look at alcohol abuse amongst Afrikaner people. It's massive. Massive. Not to say that within that white group, the other groupings don't abuse alcohol. No, I'm not saying that. And alcohol abuse is just a soothing mechanism. I mean, I think we were, at some stage, the highest alcohol consumer per capita in the world. We are alcoholics. The country. We are alcoholics. So, I think, for me, the lesson out of that podcast and what got me thinking was, you know, when we're the observer and someone is behaving in a way that an adult should not be behaving, and we call it childish behavior, whether it's a tantrum or whatever it is, you know, I think we maybe should have more compassion and maybe not react off the cuff and maybe think that maybe that person is going through something. Because we're all going through a lot, you know, we're all going through a lot. And I mean, God forbid it leads to GBV and those heinous crimes, you know. But I just like to think that we need to be more conscious and aware of the state of our fellow human being, you know. Because all these fights, all this fighting, everyone is in this negative energy space. And it's just a symptom of a deeper cause. And if we just don't, so all these conversations that we're going to be having in the country and all these things are, okay, but how do we grow a country when the people who are supposed to be productive cannot think? How do we grow a country? We're talking about growth, 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 growth. How do we grow a country when the people who are supposed to be thinking productively are unable to think productively? No fault of theirs. No fault of theirs. Not because they're stupid. Yeah. Yeah, let's be more compassionate, I think. Let's be more compassionate. Share, like, subscribe. Send me your comments at Uncurated Conversations with me, Mlamli Mayos.